Okay, let's move on. Our next speaker is Ashley Stevens. Ashley has a long career in university tech transfer and private research organization tech transfer, and he's also been a past president of what we call AUTUM, the Association of University Technology Managers.
So thank you, Steve, and thank you to the National Academies and the Laura and John Arnold Foundation for inviting me here. So my brief here was to really address the state of tech transfer and specifically to follow up on the 2011 National Academies report, Managing University Intellectual Property in the Public Interest, which I'm going to call the Wrighton report here after Mark Wrighton, who led the committee and who I might note retired 3 weeks ago after a 22-year glorious career as Chancellor of Washington University. So I want to talk about the fact that the transfer of academic technologies discoveries is making a massive contribution to public health through the discovery of new drugs. And as I think you've heard today, the public invests in the discovery of new drugs, but very little in the development of new drugs, which is the role of the private sector. And then finally, I'm going to say that the attempts to use the march-in provisions of the Bayh-Dole Act to control drug prices, in my opinion, would be highly counterproductive. So first, let me give you some unpleasant facts about tech transfer. Universities only file patents on 55% of inventions, and the very best universities only license 52% of their new patent filings, so about a quarter of their invention disclosures. 3/4 of the time, we have to tell the professor, I'm sorry, your baby is ugly, nobody is interested. Lita Nelson, who ran tech transfer at MIT for 30 years, once famously said, a hot academic technology is one that 2 companies are interested in. The median time from licensing, from discovery to licensing is 4 years. It takes time for industry to catch up. And then only 5% of new patent filings result in a licensed product. Now, this isn't specific to the drug industry. The tech transfer community keeps the figures across all technologies. And 2/3 of faculty never disclose anything in their entire careers. And the average income generating license generates only $132,000 per year. And out of 21,000 income generating licenses in 2017, only 189, 0.9%, brought in more than $1 million. So this is a tough business. And most tech transfer offices spend more than they bring in. We don't do this for the money. We do this to get the results of publicly funded research into the public in the form of new products. So this is a paper that we published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2011, where we looked at the role of public sector research, broadly defined to include national laboratories, in the discovery of new drugs and vaccines. My highest impact paper ever. President Obama quoted its results a couple of times. Didn't mention my name, but he quoted the key finding. And Mark Rohrbach and my collaborator at the NIH and I are doing an update. It's unpublished as yet, but we found a total of 357 drugs discovered in whole or in part in public sector research globally. And by the way, I should say that our definition is that there is intellectual property created that was transferred to the private sector. You can see the US heavily dominates. This is the discovering country. 2/3 came from US institutions. Overwhelmingly small molecule new chemical entities, but a lot of biologics and vaccines and in vivo diagnostics. These are the therapeutic categories: oncology, infectious disease, metabolic, and CNS, the lead, but across the whole spectrum of medical treatment. And these are the discovering institutions, the National Institutes of Health, by far the most productive. And this is just the list of those that discovered or contributed to the discovery of 8 or more. There's almost 100 institutions that have discovered or co-discovered at least one. Now, I want to talk about discovery versus development. Government really only funds discovery. About the only one I can think of that the government did a lot of development was Taxol, where the NCI invested $484 million and Bristol-Myers invested over $1 billion. But I'm going to give you a case study, Xtandi, an advanced prostate cancer drug discovered by Michael Jung and Charles Sawyers at UCLA. patented in May 2005, they track back to. Licensed to Medivation in 2005 for a total value of $2.4 million and 4% royalty. Partnered with Astellas in 2009, and in those 4 years, when it just entered phase 3, the value went up to $760 million and a 50-50 co-development and profit share in the US. Approved in 2012, UCLA monetized its royalty rights for $1.4 billion in 2016, and Pfizer acquired Medivation in 2016 for $14 billion. Now, we can track the cost of discovery of Xtandi. The grants cited in the patents were an NIH spore and an Army grant. The spore was 22.6, but Sawyer's only got about $290,000 a year for 4 years, and the Army grant was $170,000, so the total funding was $1.33 million. And that yielded 3 drugs. Xtandi, approved in 2012, Erleada, approved by J&J in 2017, and then some breast cancer drugs that failed in phase 2. So I would say an average drug discovery cost of $433,000. Now, the development cost, Medivation broke down its R&D spend by project, something that Big Pharma never does. And they funded all of Xtandi's development through September 2009, had a 50% co-development deal with Astellas in September 2009, so that they spent the same as Medivation after 2009. And you can calculate that the total US development cost was $901 million, and as in the forecasting industry we call a swinging wild-ass guess, I double that for the rest of the world, and so maybe it's about $1.8 billion to have developed it. In other words, the discovery cost was 0.02% of the development cost. And if Edison said genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, in the case of Xtandi it was 0.02% inspiration and 99.98% perspiration. But there's another way to look at that. I think trying to say, well, for the price of the NIH investment in that, the NIH should have a role in the pricing of drugs is, I think, a stretch. But there's very interesting work by Ledley and Cleary, who happen to be in the audience here today, I discovered when I arrived. They've quantified the public investment in discovering and validating the targets for new drugs. And they found 24,000 papers citing the androgen receptor, of which 8,000 cited NIH funding, and there was $5.5 billion in total grant funding. And there are 5 drugs out there that target and bind to the androgen receptor, so maybe $1.1 billion in target validation cost per drug. That, I think, is a much more substantial public sector investment. And I think we should be looking at that, which covers all drugs, not just that subsector that I showed were discovered in public sector research. So this was the Wrighton report. Back in 2011, the Kaufman Foundation was stridently criticizing technology transfer. They alleged that we were just interested in money and the big hit. And they came up with this concept of free agency, which would essentially have overturned the Bayh-Dole Act's establishment of the institutional ownership model of academic technologies and created a professor's privilege model, which most of Europe had abandoned around 2000. And the Wrighton report was not in favor of these. So I was asked to give you a picture of the current state of academic technology transfer. This data is all from the annual surveys of autumn, which goes back to 1991. So this is the history of academic invention disclosures in blue, going up, paralleling rather nicely the growth in research expenditures, of which about 2/3 comes from government sources. This is what's happened to patents. This is in yellow is new patent applications. This is total patent applications, and this is issued patents. And this is the percentage of total applications that actually issued. This shows the expenditures academic institutions make on patenting. And not surprisingly, they go up in parallel with the total patent applications. And this shows how much we spend. We're currently spending a little over $400 million, and this is just universities, teaching hospitals, public sector research institutes, does not include federal laboratories. And you can see we spend about $400 million. We get about just under half back from licensees, so there's a net investment of about $250 million. This is licensing activity. They've gone from about 1,000 licenses a year to about 8,000 now. and there are over 45,000 total active licenses out there. Of those, about half are generating some sort of money, and of those, about half are generating running royalties from a product in the marketplace. This is the data on the size of licensee company. I think most notably you can see that the main clients of universities are small companies. The percentage of technologies licensed to large companies is going down. But interestingly, the percentage licensed to brand new startup companies has doubled, more than doubled over the lifetime of this study. And this is the history of startups formed. That's all the ones that were done from 1980 to 1993, and then we've gone from a rate of about 200 a year to well over 1,000 now. And very interestingly, as you go through the financial crisis, not only did it not go down, it even went up, which I think was very interesting. This is an interesting graph. I'm part of the driver for BIDOL was the ability to grant exclusive licenses. And you can see back in 1996, when we first asked the question, about half of licenses were exclusive, half were non-exclusive, and we're now down to a third being exclusive and 2/3 non-exclusive. And Steve asked me to try and comment on that. And I did consult with senior leadership in academic tech transfer offices, and they said, we think what's happening here is that startups, high-value things like drugs, where you need a massive investment, still take exclusive licenses, and that hasn't changed. And what you're seeing here is the rise of licensing of things like creative arts, biologics, research tools, software, things like that, where exclusivity is not needed. And so that's why the overall percentage of exclusives has gone down. I don't think the absolute number has. And then this is the licensing income from, you can see we're up to about $3 billion a year, some big spikes with monetizations and litigation settlements, and the bulk of it coming from running royalties on product sales. I have gone over my time. I haven't even got to my comments on margin, but I will yield and make those comments in response to Jay's. Thank you.
So, Ashley, I have a question, which is that one of the things that the Writing Committee heard 10 years ago was that, first of all, university technology transfer offices were underinvested in people with industry experience, and therefore had unrealistic expectations about revenue, about payoffs, and about the prospect for the things they wanted to patent, which may account for the over-patenting data that you indicated. So has that changed in the last 7 or 8 years?
Well, I got into the business in 1991, and I had come from small high-tech biotechs based on academic technology. And I think a lot of the leadership of offices are now people with substantial industrial experience. And I think we have a fair sense of the value of early stage technologies that are unproven, unvalidated, and so on. Heaven knows I've been teaching valuation in the academic sector for 20-odd years now. And I think we have realistic expectations. You saw Xtandi go from a 4% royalty when it was licensed out preclinical to a 50% profit share, which translates, if you look at the profit margin, to about a 40% royalty rate that Medivation got from Astellas when they licensed it out after it had entered phase 3 trials.